She was just Claire, my girlfriend's stepmother. The kind of woman who carried a stillness about her that made everyone lower their voices a little. She didn't try to command attention. She just had it. The first time I saw her up close was at her auto shop. Yeah, not the type of place you'd expect a woman like her to own. The air smelled of oil and metal, the kind of scent that sticks to your clothes no matter how long you stay. She stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, a few dark streaks on her hands from whatever engine she'd been working on. Her hair was tied back in a loose knot, a few strands brushing her jaw when she looked up. "You're Maya's boyfriend, right?" she asked, voice low, steady. I nodded. "Yeah, car's making this sound. Sort of metal scraping." She smiled, small, patient. "They all say that. Pop the hood. Let's see what your version of metal scraping sounds like." I watched her move, not graceful in a deliberate way, but confident. Like someone who knew how things broke and how to fix them. She leaned over the engine, her fingers tracing cables and pipes like she'd done it 1,000 times. I tried not to stare, but it was hard not to. She had this calm precision, like the noise around her didn't exist. Then she looked at me, really looked, and said, "Start it." I did. The engine rattled once, then settled. She leaned in closer, her hair brushing the back of her neck, and said something I didn't quite catch. When I leaned forward to hear, her hand reached out, maybe by accident, maybe not, and brushed lightly against the side of my neck. It wasn't a dramatic touch, just her fingertips, warm from the work light above, tracing past me as she pointed toward a bolt near the radiator. "There," she said quietly. "Loose joint. That's your noise." I don't know why I froze. Maybe because the touch lingered a second longer than it should have. Maybe because she didn't pull back right away. The space between us suddenly felt smaller than the whole room. She noticed. Her eyes flicked up, then away, that kind of quick, practiced retreat people use when they've already realized they've gone too far. I stepped back first. "Right. Loose joint. Got it." Her tone softened, almost amused. "Don't worry. I'll fix it. Maya said you're good with computers, not cars." I nodded again, pretending to focus on something else, the tool rack, the hum of the light, the way her thumb absent-mindedly rubbed a smudge off her palm. But the air hadn't gone back to normal. Not really. It carried something heavier now. She didn't say much after that, just worked quietly, humming under her breath. I caught myself stealing glances, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't seem to stop. Every few minutes she'd glance at me too, but never for long. When she handed me the keys after, she didn't meet my eyes. "Tell Maya the car's good for another few months," she said. "And try not to overthink that noise next time." I nodded again, awkward. But just as I turned to leave, she added, softer this time, almost too quiet to catch. "Some things don't make noise until you get too close." I didn't answer. I couldn't. And later that night, when I replayed the day in my head, the smell of oil, the heat of the work light, the faint pressure of her fingers at my neck, that's the line that wouldn't leave me alone. A week later, I found myself back at her shop, not because the car needed fixing again, but because she'd called Maya, saying the part she'd ordered had finally arrived. Maya was busy. I offered to pick it up. I told myself it was just an errand, nothing else. But the lie felt too light in my mouth. When I walked in, the place was quieter than last time. The faint buzz of the overhead light, a radio murmuring from somewhere in the back. Claire stood by the counter, glasses perched low on her nose, flipping through paperwork. She looked different, not the same collected, steel-strong woman I'd met before. Her shoulders slouched a little, like the weight of something invisible had been resting there too long. "You again," she said, not unkindly. She pushed the papers aside. "Maya sent her messenger?" "Guess so," I said, smiling. "She's swamped with her thesis. I'm just the delivery boy today." That made her laugh, a quiet, tired sound that felt like it hadn't been used much lately. It faded almost as soon as it appeared. "She works hard," she murmured, turning to grab a box from the shelf. "Sometimes too hard. Reminds me of myself at her age. Thought work could keep me from feeling things." She caught herself mid-sentence, stopped, cleared her throat. "Here, the part." I took the box from her hands, but her fingers brushed mine, just briefly. It wasn't deliberate this time. She was just distracted. Still, it sent that same ripple through me, small but undeniable. Everything okay? I asked before I could stop myself. She blinked. What do you mean? You just seem tired. Her lips parted, maybe to deflect, but then she didn't. She looked down at her hands, rough around the edges, the kind of hands that had built and fixed and carried too much. I don't sleep well, she admitted softly. I keep thinking about, well, things I can't change anymore. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. Something about the honesty in that moment felt heavier than any confession I'd ever heard. I didn't say anything, maybe because words felt like the wrong kind of comfort. Instead, I leaned against the counter beside her. The silence between us wasn't awkward this time. It just existed, quiet, real. She glanced at me once, almost like checking if I was judging her, then gave a small smile. You're not much of a talker, are you? I talk when it matters, I said. That made her look at me longer than she should have. Not with interest, more like recognition. The kind of look that says you understand more than you should. Outside, the wind brushed against the half-open door, stirring the smell of rain and oil. She reached over to close it, and for a moment, her hand rested on the frame. The light catching the faint trace of a ring mark on her finger, long faded. She noticed me noticing, and instead of hiding it, she said quietly, almost to herself, some things leave marks even when they're gone. Then she turned away, wiping her palms on a rag. Tell Maya I said hi. I nodded, but my eyes stayed on that small pale circle on her hand, and the space between us that suddenly felt too full to breathe in. It started raining that evening, not the soft kind, but the heavy, relentless kind that swallows sound. Maya was out of town for a conference, and Claire had texted me earlier, asking if I could drop by the shop to help her move some inventory before the storm worsened. When I got there, the shutters rattled with the wind. The place was dim except for the yellow light above her desk. She stood there in an old gray hoodie, hair pulled back, damp at the edges. No makeup, no composure, just Claire, real and worn. Thanks for coming, she said. Didn't expect it to pour like this. I shrugged off my jacket. You'd do the same. That earned me a small smile, quick, tired, but honest. We worked side by side for a while, stacking boxes and wrapping parts in plastic. The air smelled of rain and old metal. Every now and then our hands brushed, and each time, I felt that tiny shift, a reminder that this was something we shouldn't be feeling at all. When the thunder cracked overhead, the power flickered and died. The lights went out completely. She sighed. Breakers in the back room. I'll go. I'll come with you, I said, already reaching for my phone light. The back room was colder, narrower. The walls hummed faintly from the storm outside. She knelt to open the breaker box, her breath visible in the dim light. I held the phone above her shoulder, the glow washing her face in gold and shadow. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reset the switch. I don't think it was from the cold. When the lights returned, she didn't stand right away. She stayed there, one hand braced against the wall, eyes closed. I waited, silent, watching how her breath caught before she finally said, I thought I was past this, she murmured. Past what? Letting someone get too close. The air between us tightened. She didn't turn, but I could see the faint tremor in her jaw, the way her voice carried a weight she hadn't meant to share. I'm not. I tart, then stopped. I didn't know what I was going to say. That I didn't mean to. That I did. She stood slowly, brushing her hands on her jeans. You should probably go before the roads flood. But she didn't move toward the door. She stayed right there, inches from me. The rain outside hammered against the tin roof, a steady, pulsing rhythm. Claire, I said quietly. She looked up then, and it wasn't anger or fear in her eyes. It was something raw, almost pleading. Don't, she whispered. You're too young to know what to do with something that isn't supposed to happen. Her voice broke halfway through, and for a heartbeat, I almost reached out. My hand lifted, fingers hesitating just above her arm, so close I could feel the warmth of her skin. But before either of us could say another word, her phone buzzed on the workbench behind us, Maya flashing across the screen. We both froze. The sound cut sharper than thunder. She turned away first, swallowing hard. Go, she said softly. Please. I did. But as I stepped out into the rain, I still felt the ghost of that moment, my hand suspended in the air, inches from a choice I didn't make. We didn't see each other for almost 2 weeks after that night. Maya said Claire had been busy, that the shop was closed for maintenance. I didn't ask questions, but I caught myself driving past the place once, twice, just to see if the lights were on. They never were. When she finally texted, it was a single line. "Can you stop by? Need help moving some files from the computer." I told myself it was innocent, but even my reflection in the car window didn't believe me. When I arrived, the shop was quiet again, empty except for her and the hum of the rain gutter outside. She sat at the desk, glasses on, staring at the computer screen. I knocked softly on the doorframe. "You came," she said, almost like she hadn't expected me to. "You asked." That got the faintest smile. "Right." I sat beside her, helped her sort through files, updating the system. The work was simple. The silence wasn't. It had weight now. Thick, heavy, charged with everything we hadn't said. After a while, she leaned back in the chair, exhaling. "You're quiet today." I glanced at her. "So are you." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "That's safer, isn't it?" "Is it?" I asked. She looked at me then. Really looked, like she had before, except this time there wasn't any deflection in her eyes. Just exhaustion, maybe from pretending. "What are we doing?" she asked suddenly, voice low. Because I can't tell anymore if this is kindness, curiosity, or something I should have stopped before it started. The question hit harder than I expected. I didn't answer right away. The screen glow flickered across her face, catching the faint line between her brows, the tired grace she carried like armor. "I don't know," I said finally, "but it doesn't feel wrong. It just feels." Her lips parted, like she wanted to respond, but no words came. She turned her head slightly, eyes unfocused, as if searching for something on the far wall. "Feelings don't always mean something good," she murmured. "Sometimes they're just reminders of what we shouldn't want." She stood then, walking toward the window. The rain outside had started again, tapping softly against the glass. She leaned one hand on the frame, the other brushing her temple. "I thought getting older meant you stop wanting impossible things," she said. "Turns out, it just means you hide it better." I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't. I just stood there, caught between respect and something far less noble. Finally, she turned back toward me. Her eyes were glassy, not from tears but from holding them in. "You should go," she whispered, "before I forget that I'm supposed to." I hesitated, one hand still on the desk. "Claire." She shook her head, almost pleading. "Please." I left, the sound of the rain following me out the door. But as I reached my car, I realized something had shifted. The silence between us wasn't just restraint anymore. It was confession, and it was louder than anything we'd ever said aloud. But one evening, just as the sun began sinking behind the hills, my phone buzzed with a voice message. Claire's voice, thin and shaky, like she hadn't meant to send it. The system crashed again. "Could you maybe stop by? I know it's late. If not, it's fine." She said fine like it meant the opposite. I listened to that message twice before I started the car. When I arrived, the shop lights were dim, the air still. She was sitting on the floor beside a box of old photo frames, her hair loose, a half-empty cup of tea beside her. The computer behind her glowed softly. "Hey," I said. "You okay?" She looked up and smiled, but it wasn't her usual controlled smile. It was the kind people give when they've been holding too much for too long. "Yeah, I just found something I wasn't looking for." She turned the frame around. A photo, maybe 10, 15 years old. A man with kind eyes, a girl in her teens. And Claire, younger, freer somehow. The air between us thickened with the quiet that follows memory. "That's my husband," she said. "Well, was." I stayed silent. She didn't need prompting. The words came out in pieces. "He died in a road accident. 10 years ago. Maya's father had already left. Then he came into our lives, and for a while it felt like maybe everything could be okay again. But grief doesn't stay gone. It just hides under new furniture." She traced a finger along the edge of the frame, her touch careful, reverent. "When he was gone, I tried to stay busy. Fixed engines, learned to build things, told myself moving forward was strength. But some days," She paused, eyes glistening. Some days I still expect him to walk through that door with coffee. I didn't know what to say. I just knelt beside her, close enough to feel the warmth from her shoulder, but not close enough to touch. He looks kind, I said. She nodded. He was. And patient. You remind me of him sometimes. Something in my chest tightened. That's not fair to either of us. I know, she whispered. But I can't help it. We both stared at the photo for a long while, the hum of the monitor filling the silence. There was no romance in the moment, just two people sitting in the aftershock of someone else's absence. Then she did something small, almost imperceptible. She reached over, placed the photo face down on the floor, and exhaled. I think that's the problem, she said softly. I keep holding on to ghosts and calling it memory. But lately, it feels like I'm remembering something that hasn't even happened yet. She looked at me then, eyes searching, scared, hopeful. And for the first time, I realized she wasn't talking about her husband anymore. It rained again that night. It always seemed to rain when we found our way back to each other. I stopped by the shop without a reason this time. The door was unlocked, the lights dim. She was sitting by the counter, not working, not reading, just being there, lost somewhere in her thoughts. She didn't look surprised to see me. Maybe she'd expected it. Maybe I had too. Hey, I said softly. Her voice was calm when she replied. You shouldn't keep coming here. I know. Then why do you? I didn't have an answer ready. I think she knew that. She sighed. The kind of sigh that carried months of confusion and something like surrender. You're kind, she said. Too kind for someone who doesn't realize what kindness can cost. I leaned against the doorframe. You think that's what this is? Kindness. Her eyes met mine. Tired, searching. I think it started that way. But now, I don't know what it is anymore. Neither did I. But I knew what it wasn't. It wasn't a crush. It wasn't infatuation. It was something quieter, heavier. The kind of connection that sneaks up on you, stays behind your ribs, refuses to leave. She stood and walked to the window, watching the water blur the streetlights outside. Her reflection looked softer, smaller somehow. I used to believe that love always had a beginning and an end, she said. You meet, you fall, you break, you move on. But this, she gestured vaguely between us, this doesn't fit in any of those boxes. I stepped closer, careful not to close the space completely. Maybe not everything has to. She turned then, slowly, eyes glistening. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It felt like acknowledgement. She took a breath. If I were 10 years younger, I cut her off gently. You'd still be you. Her lips parted, trembling slightly before they curved into a faint, helpless smile. You don't know what you're saying. I do, I said. Maybe that's the problem. The air felt heavy, charged but calm, like the world outside had gone still just to let us speak. She looked at me again, then down at my hand resting on the counter. Slowly, carefully, she placed hers over it. The touch wasn't desperate or impulsive. It was weary, almost resigned. A small, honest admission that words couldn't carry. Her thumb brushed lightly against my knuckles. A single motion that said, I see you. I wish I didn't. Thank you for ruining my quiet. We stayed like that for a while, two people in a space too small for what they weren't saying. Then she whispered, you should go before I start believing we can rewrite the years. I didn't argue. I just nodded. But when I finally stepped out into the rain, I realized something unshakable. We hadn't said I love you. We didn't need to. The silence between us had already said it, and promised it would never be spoken again. It's been months since that night, the night she placed her hand over mine and said nothing. I haven't been back to the shop since. Sometimes I drive by, just slow enough to see if the lights are still on. They usually are. Maya and I didn't last. We ended things quietly, the way some stories fade out rather than break. She never asked questions about Claire, and I never gave her a reason to. Some truths don't belong in the light. But Claire, she stayed in my mind like a soft echo that refuses to fade. Not a wound, not a fantasy, just something real that happened between two people who knew better, but also knew themselves too well to pretend it didn't mean anything. I think about that night sometimes, how she said, you should go before I start believing we can rewrite the years. And maybe that's what we were both afraid of, not the wrongness of it, but how right it felt, how frighteningly natural it was to want something that couldn't exist outside that moment. People talk about love like it's this clear thing, a promise, a decision, a beginning. But what we had wasn't any of those. It was a quiet understanding, a recognition. It taught me that love doesn't always arrive to stay. Sometimes it just stops by to remind you that you're still capable of feeling something real. I saw her again, once a few weeks ago. It was in a grocery store parking lot. She was loading groceries into her car, hair tied back the same way, sunlight catching in the strands. When she noticed me, her eyes widened, not in surprise, just gentle acknowledgement. No words, just a small nod. The kind people share when they've already said everything that mattered. And that was enough. I drove home that day with the window down, the wind loud enough to drown out the quiet. I didn't feel the ache I used to, just gratitude, for the moment, for her, for the part of myself she helped uncover. She once told me that getting older meant learning to hide the things you still want. But I think it also means learning how to hold them without letting them burn you. I'll probably always think of her when it rains. The smell of oil, the hum of engines, the quiet between words. All reminders of a time when love wasn't about having, but understanding. And maybe that's what real connection is. Not permanence, but recognition. Two lives crossing long enough to leave a gentle mark. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?